Welcome to the show tonight. This is just going to be a little primer, as I mentioned in the description. Sorry about the wait while you're getting started. We were getting started here. I just wanted to refer people back to Dr. Judy Wood's website so that we can take a look at some of the information that she's provided there and compare it with some of the things that we're seeing with the wildfires, the California wildfires. I have a video also that's posted on my playlist. It is, I'll bring it up here. Let's just see, it's already playing. Just going to show you this on the left here. There's a video that talks about the Australian wildfires of 2009, and it kind of goes through the evidence and the information that is very akin to what's happening in California. They've been experiencing, of course, wildfires for many, many, many years, Australia, just because of the incredible heat. So, it's not an either-or situation. This is just a matter of checking evidence. We'll go back to that. You can take a look at it and listen to what's being said and actually watch. It's quite horrendous because you're following the firefighters right into the storm. And literally it is a storm that you're experiencing when you're dealing with a phenomenon like that. When you see the combination of things like the winds that come up, the drought, clearly the electrical wires, the electrical component. That's why they always turn off the electricity, or generally speaking, when there's a fire in the area, that's one of the first things they do. So I'm going to put forward a couple of ideas. I've posted some videos, interviews that I did with Dr. Ole Johansson, Dr. Sandra Ellier-Perlingeri. She's no longer with us. She was highly affected by the by EMFs, and so it's very sad that she has succumbed to. She had several bouts with cancer and various responses, which she attributed very much to EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies. So I guess what I'm trying to do in this episode is just to give people a sense of the difference between electromagnetic frequencies and directed energy weapons. And I think what's happening is people are conflating a bunch of different things. So what Dr. Judy and I have tried to do through the PSYOP recovery program is to help you with your critical thinking, to help you to understand the difference between various technologies. But, well, that would be more my side of things. She just wants us to look at the evidence and not to go ahead of ourselves, like just hang back. And she's asked a lot of people on this subject if they've ever investigated fires. And even if you've investigated fires, the phenomenon that we're looking at here seems, if we're to follow our ideas about the fact that they're anomalous fires, they're not your normal California fires, that you would have to be also pretty adept at other technology to be able to make any assumptions or to draw any conclusions about whether it was an electromagnetic frequency or directed energy. So now directed energy is just that. It's energy that's directed in a certain way. How it affects the structures is very specific depending on what the technology is. We know about what electromagnetic frequencies can do. There's actually a soup, as Dr. Ole Johansson expresses it, around us, because not only do we have cell towers and not only do we have smart meters, but we have these Zigbee meters that are in each of the neighborhoods. So what each individual home or building has to communicate with the Zigbee meter, meaning it's going back and forth, it's pulsating back and forth. and it's communicating with the master meter, if you want to put it that way. So, he says it's a soup. And so basically, if you've got kids walking home from school, you've got, whether they have EMFs in their actual school, if they're, even if they don't have internet in the school, they're walking through these waves. And they're frequencies. There's radio frequencies. There's the 2.4 gigahertz, and then there's the 6.2, I think it is, gigahertz. Anyway, it goes up. And so the thing is that we've been using cell phone technology for a long time, and that relies on radio frequencies, RFs. And so this is, even hair dryers give up off a certain frequency. So we have been surrounding ourselves with electricity. So there is a similarity in the sense that electricity and energy are involved in all of these things, which is why things like hurricanes and tornadoes act the way that they do. They give off energy, and they create all sorts of weird phenomenon. And so what I want to do is just go into a couple of the pictures that of what are called toasted cars. And so there's something that you may or may not have seen in, if you're familiar with Dr. Judy's work, then you have seen some of these things, and you're familiar with what a toasted car looks like. But if you're not, I'm just going to show you this image here. So on the left, of course, we've got the documentary going. I just thought I'd keep it going in the background because every once in a while it shows the fires as we progress with the documentary. There's a lot of there's interviews as well, which I think are really great to listen to. They're hard to listen to, but I think they're really interesting because it helps you to understand how similar, again, these fires in Australia are to what we're seeing here. So I think it's important to put that in a framework too, because that was almost 10 years ago. So it's not that what's happening in California is new in terms of how the fire spreads and how it moves. And the fact that there's a firestorm and these windstorms come out of just the sheer magnitude of the fire itself, and it creates its own weather system at a certain point when it gains traction. And what I find interesting is that because it was almost 10 years ago that this particular fire happened, it bears comparing with what's happening now so that we can see apples to apples that the weather systems themselves are the same. There's nothing that's changed as far as a global climate change. So my contention is that there's geoengineering involved in this, and that's clear. And if you talk to Perlin-Jerry or Dr. Johansson or any of these people that have studied, the HARP phenomenon, the HARP system, these chemtrails that are created in the sky are generally in a crisscross pattern. So the idea is that they're creating an actual grid. There's aluminum, strontium, and barium within those crisscrosses being laid, if you want to put it that way, by these planes that are actually creating a grid system. And then you'll notice too that there was in 2012, by December 31st, I believe, there was a worldwide initiative to roll out smart meters around the globe. Now, there are a couple of countries, I do believe Holland opted out cleverly, but when you look at something that's global in nature like that, you have to wonder what's going on, because that's not a coincidence. Why the sudden urgency to have these smart meters? And they're all being produced by basically the same companies with the same technology. Anyway, I'm going to go into some of the other characteristics of smart meters as well, because you'll notice how they do actually create fires. There's been lawsuits. Saskatoon Hydro, I'm not sure exactly, Sask Hydro, can't remember exactly what the name of the company is, but they were sued and they had to actually take the smart meters out of every single home where they were installed because they won their lawsuit. They established to that court anyway in Saskatchewan that smart meters were actually causing fires and they were destroying homes. We're going to go into that. For today, what I wanted to do, or tonight, I wanted to just go into some of the characteristics here again with these fires, with these cars. These are what Dr. Judy Wood terms toasted cars, because, and I love the way that, scientists come up with new terms all the time. People think it's really strange, I guess. Oops, I didn't center that too well. People think it's odd that, she uses some of these terms, but sometimes people use placeholders like star numbers. If you find a new star, or a new planet or whatever the anomaly is, they're often numbered or named after the people that discover them. So it's not unusual to have various phenomena that don't have any other explanation named as placeholders. And so Dr. Judy Wood talks about these as being toasted cars. And I want to just take a look at this and really focus in on this so that you're being educated, so that when people talk to you about the fires in California and you look at the vehicles, you have something to compare it with. This is called evidence, checking the evidence. Now, I don't want to be in any way demeaning, because I'm sure all of you are very critical thinkers, and the very fact that you're interested in any of this, or that you've read any of her books, if you've read her book or seen her videos, or tuned in here when she's been on, you'll know that she has this amazing gift for being able to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And so, I've spent hours and hours and hours with her, listening and with the audience and talking to her. And it's taken me a long, long time to get to where I can just stop my brain from going ahead of the, of the chatter, I guess it is, that's in our head, because we want to make assumptions and we want to draw conclusions. And we can't do that when we're trying to actually look at science. And I think part of the dumbing down process that we've gone through with our schools is to, first of all, say, here's what we want to prove, and then make science fit in or conform to our preconceived ideas. So if we look at this really carefully, and this is one of the images that I've had a chance to go over with Dr. Judy Wood. Now, I'm not speaking on her behalf in any possible way. I'm speaking on my own behalf. I think that I speak for her when I say that we need to look at the evidence. And just as I'm not a doctor and I'm not prescribing anything, I feel that I certainly couldn't speak for her, and I wouldn't want to anyway. What I'm really trying to do is to take the person out of the situation and put the evidence into the situation, and allow what she has given us in terms of information and ways of reading images, take that and be able to duplicate it. That's a really successful way of changing things. It's something that a person uses in business when they're doing sales, for instance. They'll get I remember when I was learning about how to sell a product, and it was a multi-level thing. I think it was Alouette, and it was a great product. But one of the things I learned, I was quite young, and they said, just memorize the spiel, memorize, do your own research. But if you're concerned about getting up in front of somebody, do your own homework, but then do what the person who taught you does. Teach it in the same way. Don't go off the script until you're very aware of how to answer questions and that sort of thing. And if you can't answer questions, then say that. So we're coming up to Thanksgiving, and a lot of people will be together with family and friends. And of course, there's a couple of ways it can go. People can get into huge arguments, or they can share small little segments of information and help to correct. And this is what I'm trying to do on Facebook too, is just rather than being combative, confrontive, just ask a question. Have you seen this picture? Or do you know what the characteristics are? So if we take a look at these pictures, you'll notice that there's not one little bit of glass that is that in any of these vehicles. It's uniform all the way through. And people will say, well, the glass melted out. And that's what they said about 9/11 too. And yet the so-called fires that caused these, the firemen were actually walking through this scene. It was not hot. So those fires are what Dr. Wood calls Cheeto fires. And again, people make fun of her because she calls them Cheeto fires. But all she's doing is saying that they're not real fires. They're not fires as in the kind of fires that we're used to. So we have to get out of the habit of calling something by the name that we know it by, because we know that fire is hot and it burns. So as Dr. Judy would say, not everything that glows is hot. Everything that's hot glows, but not everything that glows is hot. And if you can get that idea into your head, you can begin to understand why they're called Cheeto fires. I'm not going to bring them up today because we're not going to be going into that bit. I don't want to confuse people about the fires, because clearly there are fires that are taking place in California. And one of the anomalies, one of the things about directed energy weapons are, and you'll see this whether here or in Iraq, there's all sorts of evidence of those weapons being used in Iraq. It's destructive. It has the same destructive power, but it has some really interesting features. And one of it is that certain elements, certain materials will be affected. And if you'll notice here, there's actually the door handles are missing. It seems to be that anything that has a magnetic element to it. So say the door handle has a magnetic aspect, the fobs that you use to open the door. One of the things that she noticed as well was that the trunks were often open. And so that means that they were actually missing the mechanism that kept them shut. So the weapon tends to have an effect on certain materials. There's another picture that I can. What I would like you to do is actually go over to drjudywood.com. If you don't have Where Did the Towers Go, which you all should have, go over to drjudywood.com and you can get so you can see some of these other images. But really inspect some of those pictures and notice that they are they're missing certain elements. Now the engine block was gone. We're not talking about it melted. We're talking about it was completely gone. Gonzo, and it disappeared. And so, that's not melting. So again, we need to use maybe other words. It just disappeared. And I had a hard time with this as well because, I kept wanting to say that the towers, the WTC towers fell, or that they, whatever, but they went away. That's the way that Dr. Judy would put it, is that they went away. And that is really the only way that you can term it, because they actually disappeared. The fabric of them, the makeup of them, everything about them disappeared, and it happened faster than a building could even fall, faster than a billiard ball could fall off of 110 stories. So we know that it was a different phenomenon than we're used to seeing. So it was not explosions. So I would just want to actually go back to her website here, because you'll notice that she says this: the towers didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground. They turned mostly to dust in midair, and you can see some of the images there. I'll just move that down a little bit so that you can see the website's changed, and the images scroll by, so I didn't want to have it be too distracting. I kind of like the way that it was. I know you can go into some of the pictures still and take a look at it, but it used to be that you could take a look at the pictures and they weren't scrolling. But in any case, this is the website, and you get a chance to see some of the images from 9/11, because that's what people are comparing the fires to when they're talking about directed energy weapons. But this is a very, very important concept. If you can get this idea, the towers didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground. They turned mostly to dust in midair. Okay, so when we're talking about fire starts from the bottom, and it actually begins and it creates destruction from the ground. And it burns up things from the bottom, and then it goes up to the top. It rises. What happened with the towers is that they actually started to dustify at the top. They just disappeared. They were no more. It's like the Monty Python skit. It's the towers that were the X towers, and so in that way, they differ from the fires. It wasn't a fire. It was a dustification. The picture you see on the screen right now has Dr. Judy talking at the energy conference, the Breakthrough Energy Conference, and that was in 2012. She's showing one of the slides where you're seeing some of those cars that we later see. Now that's daytime, just so you're aware. That's just before the image that we saw of the vehicles, that we saw the aftermath. This is what they looked like when they were being toasted, as she would call it. If you look at the videotape, you can actually see that there were firefighters walking through. And what she's showing you there, too, with the infrared, is that they're not hot. Those fires are not hot. They glow, but they're not hot. So this is something that you need to really take in. And John Hutchison created he replicated some of Nikola Tesla's work, and he was able to create something like this. And if you take a look at the Hutchison effect, I believe you can look it up on YouTube, you'll notice that these little so-called Cheeto fires were part of the phenomenon that took place when John Hutchison was Hutchison. I'm sorry, I did what I tell people not to do. He was able to replicate these anyway, and they are not hot. So when Rudy Giuliani was standing outside, he was standing on ground zero, and he was saying, oh yeah, these fires, they're burning up our firefighters, and they're 2,500 degrees. They were walking on the ground, and they were also using hydraulic equipment, which if anyone's ever used hydraulic equipment on a really, really hot day, sometimes they actually have to stop it and let it cool down even on a hot day. So if the fires are 2,500 degrees, then why do they have their air hoses and such strewn across? They have all sorts of flammables right there at ground zero. Again, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of the incongruity of the argument that do weapons create traditional fires. These are not traditional fires. This is a destructive. This is an interaction between the weaponry itself, and it happens it happens just before the actual destruction takes place. It's kind of an interest. It doesn't happen for very long. So it's almost like a poof. It takes place, and this happens in the Hutchison experiments as well. You can see that there's an action, there's a reaction, and then there is a destructive property. And so these are things that the reason DEW weapons are not believed to be used is because people don't even understand. They don't even think they're possible, and all they do is think of them as some sort of a space beam. That's not necessarily. There is an triggering effect, but keep in mind that there was also a hurricane offshore that day that had a trajectory right to New York. It was hovering right there, and then it took off. So the best thing you can do is to study tornadoes, to take a look at some of these phenomena. They're electrical in nature more than they are heat related. And when we think of fires, we think of heat right away, and that's just the way that our minds think. And that makes sense. But we have to get out of thinking that way if we want to solve the problem. You know, as Dr. Judy would say, what problem are you trying to solve? And for some people, they're just trying to be right, I guess, or they're trying to prove that they know about a technology that clearly they don't know about, because if they did, then we would have solved 9/11, because it's clear that there is a technology being used that nobody's admitted to anyway, although I've seen a lot of evidence from some images and some videos that I've seen out of Iraq, and it's too appalling to even talk about, but where human bodies are affected, and they, a 6-foot human turns into a 3-foot human, and unrecognizable, because it interacts with water. Just electromagnetic frequencies also interact with water, and we are composed of water. So there's certain materials that seem to be affected. Again, if we take a look at this image, I'm just looking at it myself. I have a fairly small screen right now, but I'm pretty familiar with these images. But she's done a good job of illustrating and labeling these so that I can help you to see things as well. There's still a waxed area that is visible, like untouched, completely untouched. You can see there's almost just a line there between the part of the cruiser that is affected and not. And this is one of those trunks that is open. It's just it seems that the locking mechanism was affected with whatever the technology was. Again, I'm going to go over some of the other pictures. I don't want to make this too long. I'm just really trying to get you going with the idea of checking into this yourself and looking at the website. And if you have the book, going back to some of the pictures. If you do have Where Did the Towers Go, you're at such an advantage, because, I used to, I've actually given away the 2 copies that I had, and it's very hard to get them back, which is, and on one hand, it's good because I want people to be using them. If they are using them, I think it's great. But I used to take it with me in my vehicle, so that if I was somewhere, I wouldn't take it in if I was visiting, but I had it handy in case I needed to get it. And if I had invitation, that's a lot of how I try to introduce people. I will start talking about something, and I'd say, yeah, well, if I had the pictures, I could show you how, and then I can say, well, I do have the book in the car if you're interested in talking about this. But at least it gives people an option as to whether they want to get involved. But often, if you talk about it enough, like you say things like the trunk of the vehicles seem to be affected, like they were, all the trunks had popped on 9/11. There was a delineation. There were still these plastic lights that were unaffected, even though the rest of the car was gone. Again, if you look at some of the pictures, you'll see that the fabric on the seat like the seat covers, well, everything, not just the fabric, but the whole seat was gone, but the frame was still there. And if you take a look at this, you'll see that one of the tires is fine, and the other one's right down to the rim. It's not like with the California fires, where you've got rubber that's just melted and it's gone onto the road, or it's part of the car and it's all fused together. It's a separate phenomenon. It's a separate action that's taking place here. So this is, this is a really good picture to take a look at, because it gives you a lot of different information that you may have missed. Of course you've missed it, because this is the genius of Dr. Judy. This is her area. She not only is she an engineer, but she also has a master's degree that specializes in basically looking forensically at images. And so she sees things in images that even I don't see as a photographer. She's looking at it in a different way. People are employed with police departments to take a look at images, to take a look at information that would absolutely go by the boards with anybody else, even other police officers. That's why they take pictures. It's not just as evidence per se, but they get a lot out of the information. So again, you can see that the door seems to have lost its handle. And with these vehicles, I'm not going to say empirically that these ones are missing the block mounts for the engine, but most of them are. Those are, I don't know how many of you have seen an engine being lifted out of a vehicle, but those are big babies. And this phenomenon, whatever it was, lasted for just a matter of moments, and these things disappeared. The other thing that happened was that there was a reaction. And if you take a look at anything to do with cold fusion, you'll notice that there is always a helium element involved. You'll see that there's helium is released through that action, and that's why the dust that was formed on 9/11 went up, and you can actually see it from space. And that's, so people say, where did the towers go? They went to space. And actually parts of the towers, they were microscopic parts, of course, but they were found all along the seaboard. They were found miles, counties away. And there's no other reason for it. It's not, it wasn't smoke that went up and up into the atmosphere. It was actual dust particles. So I found this one to be really helpful in terms of just being able to take a look at it. And that's why I'm going really slowly over just a few images. And I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time with this. It's just, I guess I would like to have more people who are educating themselves about this, because I feel it's really important to help people who may not have gotten this information before, or who may be going down the wrong path as far as, it's just such a waste of energy, for one thing. But it's also really important that we see this for what it is, because whoever is creating these effects, the crew, we basically need to let them know we're on to them. So the more of us that know what's going on, as with George Webb, his idea is that we're all on the same page, that we understand the history, that we understand the context, we understand so each of us has our area of expertise, and we will overwhelm the crew with our knowledge and expertise. They're trying to dumb us down. And what I'm trying to do is to smarten myself up, to get smart, and to not suggest that it's somebody else's job to be looking at this. It wasn't Dr. Judy's job to notice. The other engineers somehow didn't notice, but she did. And she's paid a huge price for it. And I just feel like it behooves us to really to be part of the solution. We, instead of throwing around memes and I mean, memes are fine, but throwing around information or making comments on Facebook that are not going to be helpful in the long run. So if you can post a picture like this, for instance, that is helpful if you're able to give an explanation of what people are seeing. Because, again, if you take a look at this, you'll notice some very strange effects, some very strange phenomena that are taking place. And there are also some vehicles that you'll notice that they're upside down, they've levitated, they actually are lifted up and moved. Again, it's that there's a levitation aspect to this as well. This, of course, is not one of those, but you'll notice that some of the vehicles are actually flipped. By the way, a lot of these vehicles, this was right after, and it's amazing that we even have these pictures because most of them were towed away. They were, because these were a mile away. There's absolutely no reason why this should be happening a mile away. But you can see that the rust has already set in. That's one of the phenomenon, that there's sort of an instant rusting that takes place. That's another thing that you can take a look at when you're checking out the fires, the California fires. Take a look and see if there are any vehicles that have been partially affected, where there's this rusting effect that you can see near the front tire there. You can see there's a bit of rust that's starting in. And, you don't have to trust me. It's just if you went through the whole presentation, you would see evidence of that. And you would also see there's a whole parking lot full of vehicles where you can take a look at them. And it's all the way through. There's the same response, the same phenomenon that are taking place with all the vehicles. Again, this has got the front tire is gone. Back tire is unaffected. The front tire is completely gone. It's not melted. These are the things I want you to just notice as you're looking at this image. Don't just whip by the images. And this is, again, what I've learned from sitting with Dr. Judy through the presentations, over the years when we've done these presentations for various people, especially people who haven't seen her book. And that was one thing that we did with the PSYOP recovery program many years ago. I'm going to say it was 2012. We would have somebody come on, a guest come on, and one of them was Julia Davis, who is an engineer, and she also is a whistleblower. It was, just interesting people who had experience with some of these things. We had a person who worked with steel, and we would show them some of the phenomenon. And every time there'd be these moments where their jaws would drop, which is what I loved about the show, because it was an honest, spontaneous response. And when I looked at this, I just, the more I looked at it, the more you look at it, the more you study it, the more you're going to say, that's not right. That doesn't seem right. And you're going to notice when you start to see other vehicles, vehicle fires, vehicles that have been destroyed through any number of different means, it'll bring up some questions. Write the questions down. Why would this happen to a vehicle that's a mile away, that's parked a mile away? Why would it have rust setting in right away? Why is the tire gone? It's not melted. Could this be something other than a fire? Okay, so this, if you take a look at what Dr. Judy Wood is talking about in Where Do the Towers Go, this is evidence of a weapon, a directed energy weapon that has been replicated by Hutchison and various other people. So when she was looking at it, she was looking at it as the phenomenon and what she could observe of what was happening. Then she met John Hutchison and found that what she was observing lined up very well with his experiments. So this is when you know that you're on the right track, because you're seeing that there's an intersection of the research that's being done. Okay, so while I'm, sorry to be, spending so much time on each image, I just want to really impress on you how important it is to to really spend time with this, because otherwise we are going to be buying into this idea, this dumbing down idea, that they're expecting us not to look at it, or they're expecting that these will have disappeared before we get a chance to look at it. This is not a situation where one car was piled on top of the other car by a tow truck. This is before the tow truck ever got there. These were taken by somebody who saw, I have no idea who the photographer was or is, but this was a mile away. The same thing can be seen in other images that are closer to the World Trade Center, by Building 7, for instance, where it was really dark there, where the car fires were. There's a lot of pictures that were taken along that street as well. But these ones are particularly weird because they're a mile away. Now, I'm going to ask you, do you think that this would be the case with the California fires? Because what I saw was that there were some vehicles that were affected and some weren't. There might be a vehicle parked in the driveway and it's toast, it's gone. And then there might be another vehicle that is in the next driveway and it managed to avoid the fire. So you can see that it's actually the fire itself, wherever the fire was burning hottest, was where the most destruction was done. The tires melt. The paint melts. The plastic melts. You will not find that to be the case when it comes to 9/11. What was happening on 9/11 was that certain materials disappeared altogether. Do you see a tire on that rim? No, there's no tire. There's a wheel left. There is certain types of metal that's left. There is no fire here. I guess that's really the bottom line, is there is no fire in this area. So again, this is the difference between a directed energy weapon and what I think is a fire that was exacerbated. It was also possibly started with the use of smart meters as Zigbee. I have absolutely no doubt that there was an accelerant, and the accelerant was, an inciting factor, and it's something that ignited it, and also that made the fires burn hotter. And I think it's a combination of geoengineering, the fact that they're laying these chemtrails and that they're being put into a grid pattern, and that they're filling the skies over certain areas. And my sense is, and I have no ability to prove this whatsoever, but from all the interviews I've done with people and the research that I've done and comparing it with other technologies, it appears that these houses are basically wired to burn to the ground. And so when you say, well, there was nothing left, well, imagine all the wiring that's going into a home, and imagine the idea that you've got all these so-called smart appliances that are able to be triggered, just for sake of argument. And you've got a smart meter that has been proven to be combustible. If you take a look at the lawsuits, and I'm going to do a show dedicated just to smart meters and the different lawsuits that have come about based on the fact that they start fires, and not just little fires, not just sort of localized around the smart meter fires. And often the fires do get channeled along the electrical wiring. So think about that. It's not just the box on the front of the house. Think about all of these appliances that were being sold, the smart technology that works along with the smart meters. And then think about the chemicals that are being put up in the air, the strontium, barium, aluminum, and think of the way that those might interact. And think about also the drought conditions that can be created through the geoengineering process itself, through manipulation of weather. And if you don't think that weather can be manipulated, I'm sure there's very few people in my audience that would think that way. But just go back to Beijing. It was 2008, I believe, Olympics 2008, where they were talking about creating more snow for the Winter Olympics. It was right out there. And there's something about our brains that just seems to forget about this. It's like we can't put those ideas together and remember, oh, there's no such thing as geoengineering. If anyone says that to you, just remind them about what was happening in 2008. There's stories. And again, I want to do shows basically to help you to help other people to become educated, because my sense too is that as things are brought to the light and as more and more people are educated, we overwhelm the people that are trying to do us harm with the truth and with facts and with evidence. And if nothing else, they can't get away with doing this. It's like the election fraud. I think it's shocking some people that we're onto them. I think it's really shocking some of these guys that have been used to getting away with it over the years, that this is not going to happen anymore because people have become aware of the election fraud. This is the climate fraud. So, people can talk about and how much money are they making? How many lives are they destroying through this process? And so people will say, well, why? Don't start with why. Start with evidence. Start with looking at something and saying, clearly this is happening. We can't, there are people's lives were lost. Their houses were lost. It's happening. So there's no question of that being the case. So, the next step is to clear our minds of why, and just go to what is happening, and to start to see and compare it to some, educate ourselves again as to what fire looks like, what dew looks like, what EMFs look like, and how they interact. And go back and listen to Ole Johansson. I've put up some resources. I've put some of the stories on Red Pill Square so that you can go over there and take a look at some of the reprints of some of the stories where people were suing about the smart meters and that sort of thing. So I try to put as many resources on redpillsquare.com as I can so that you can get some of the background information and, again, educate yourself. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to try to come back every evening and just add a little bit more to this story. And if I can, if Dr. Judy has time sometime, I'm hoping that she might join us, but I'm not making any guarantees. But I guess really at this point it's kind of like the hand holding doesn't really need to take place with all of us. It's really great to talk to her. And if you have any questions, please put them in the comment area. Please ask your questions for Dr. Judy Wood, and I will pass them along to her. If you have specific questions about the wildfires, I'm pretty sure I know what she's going to say, but I'm not going to speak for her. You can see an interview that I did with her about the California wildfires last year. You can see an interview that she did with our friend Andrew Johnson of Check the Evidence. You can see his response on checktheevidence.com. I might be able to get Andrew to come on the show and talk about it. But in a sense, they've already answered all of the questions in terms of how they see the situation. And I think my assessment is pretty much in line. Again, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for anybody else. But I think what will happen is, as you look at these videos and you look at the resources that we're giving you, and you go to Check the Evidence and you go to drjudywood.com, you will put things together for yourself. I'm not asking you to think the way that I think. I'm just helping you to move along the track a little bit that I've been able to go along myself so that we can exponentially influence other people. And I really ask that you invite people over, because I'm going to be answering questions for people. So I'm going to just take a look. We've got Tennis here. Try to tell most people that smart meters are a hazard, and they try so hard to look like they are not willing to listen. I can't waste time on them. Well, you know what I would say, Tennis, is that there's nothing that's wasted, because there's going to come a time. I think it's a lot like George Webb's. I don't know if you're familiar, but we talk about George on this channel quite a bit. He works tirelessly, and sometimes it takes a year before even a tiny bit of the evidence that he's talking about comes to light, and he doesn't get credited for it. So this is a very selfless act, I think, that we're doing. Just as with Dr. Judy, she sacrificed her life really to do this. She had a great career. She was a professor and was doing very well until she decided to speak out about 9/11, and it changed her life. And all I can do is encourage people to learn themselves, and then when asked and when given invitation, to provide really good evidence, really good metadata, as George would call it, so that when people are trying to refute you and they start getting into their talking points, their narrative, the one that they've been taught to discuss, you can actually come back with some really cohesive information. So if you're talking about smart meters, again, if you want to take a look over at redpillsquare.com, you'll see actual articles from actual newspapers, not they're mainstream newspapers. They're not conspiracy theory websites. They're actual publications that have editors where and actual court cases where smart meters were implicated in fires. And not only that, but in Saskatchewan were actually taken out across the province. We're talking about an entire Canadian province. So I would ask you to show that to your friends. Don't bother trying to argue with people. Just say, may I show you, are you interested in any evidence? Because I have an article here if you're interested in seeing it. And that's why I published it for you. So I reprinted it. I believe it's from 2014. A couple of them are 2014, 2015, that kind of. Anyway, there's 2 or 3 articles there that you can use. And then that might just be the thing. I did this with my brother. I looked out the window once. He lived near the water, and you could see over the water, you could see these chemtrails being laid. And, I said, oh, that's interesting. You have chemtrails here, like right outside your window. And he just went, what do you mean chemtrails? He had no idea what I was talking about. And that's pretty much all I said. I just said, oh, they're for whatever reason, they're laying these, chemical trails. They're not contrails, because contrails disappear. And, I went through that. And I said, these are going to, not only are they going to last, but they're going to dissipate, and then they're going to turn into clouds. And I just left it at that. There's no arguing. There's no nothing. And I can tell you right now, I'd love to have my brother on Reno Man on the show sometime, because he is, he got it after, he actually sent me an image. He was driving and he said, like this. And it was because I wasn't making a huge deal about it, I think. I just kind of let him see it for himself. And sometimes that's the best thing to do, is just let people see it, give them a little bit of the information. As I say, I don't bring Dr. Judy Wood's book into people's houses and plonk it down on the table. I have done that before. And it's people would make this huge wide berth around it, and they weren't willing to pick it up at all. But if I take one thing and I say, it's really weird about these cars because they, the mechanisms were gone or whatever. And, it's easier if you can see it. And I do have some pictures if you're ever interested. And often people will go, yeah, I'd sure like to see that. Oh, okay. You're giving me an invitation? I will show you. So sometimes we just need a bit of an invitation. But I would say just don't go overboard. If people aren't interested, that's fine. I think that the more of us that do know, the faster it's going to come to pass that people will know about this. It can't be hidden, just like the Florida, like the elections, the scams. It's going to come to light. People, it can't be hidden anymore. So it's just going to come out, and you will be vindicated. But I guess that's not my initial sense. Is I just really want to save the planet. I'd like it if people didn't die in fires. I'd like it if we could get to the truth instead of circling around here with all this speculation and infighting. They want us to fight. I'm not going to fight with people. I'm just going to allow them to use their brains and see what's happening. Ken Johnson, right on the broadcast, they said that they were causing rain to get rid of pollution. It was like, what? Yeah, exactly, Ken. I know. There's so many little tips in there. There was a weatherman once that said that, and I guess was doing it very innocently, but he was saying, oh, it's like there's this flak that's coming out of the clouds, and I can't remember exactly what he called it, but needless to, he was just making observations because he's a meteorologist. And he says, I've never seen this before, and it made it to air, and I think somebody just was asleep at the switch and they didn't notice it, and it may still be on YouTube somewhere. But it was interesting because he said exactly what it was, that there are these particles, and that there is, I think it was actually nanoparticles and nanotechnology that was being put into the, conspiracy theorists, would say that it's nanoparticles. Well, no, it's actually true, and people have found it. And, you've got Cliff Carnicum, who's, talks about Morgellons, and there are people like Joni Mitchell who often don't come out in public because they're dealing with Morgellons. It's just a disgusting, horrible thing, and I don't even like thinking about it. But there are people that are feeling the effects of the whatever it is that's raining down on us. There are people that are getting sick. Lithium is something that they give to people who are experiencing depression, and we have lithium in batteries. It's being released into the air. When you look at these fires that are on the screen right now, and you think about all the particulates that go up into the air as a result of these fires. But do take a look at this if you can. This documentary is quite good, and I actually showed it to Dr. Judy, and she said that she thought it was a really good way of explaining some of the phenomenon that happened, because these guys have dealt with it. Australians have dealt with these kind of fires for a long time. Yeah, it's weird to have them in California, but they also talk about how trees are left standing while other structures burn because they have a root system. They have water inside of them, and these fires are so fast moving. They just take whatever's available to them to burn up, and then once it's absorbed or once it's consumed, they move on to the next place. And some things, vegetation sometimes doesn't burn because it has enough of a water content, whereas the building doesn't. So it's opportunistic in that way, the fires. So that was, I believe, the best way that I have of explaining what she was trying to explain to me. So I'm passing along this video so that you can see it. As you can see, it's on my site. It's called Wildfire Documentary for Critical Thinkers. If you look that up, you'll find it. And I think it's a really informative, very difficult to watch, but informative, and very timely for what we're talking about here. So I've been over an hour now. The Beijing Olympics broadcast. Okay, yeah. Thanks, Ken. Yeah, it's. I remember them talking about the snow. They were concerned about the amount of snow. I think they had less snowfall than they were expecting, and of course, being the host country, wanting to, live up to their hosting responsibilities, they decided they needed to provide more snow. And I know they were talking about that in Vancouver as well during the Winter Olympics. They were saying they may have to. They'll say things like they have to make snow, And I'm thinking, well, what do you do? Tote it up to the top of the mountain? So, sometimes these are euphemisms, and they really mean that we're going to do some geoengineering. So it's been around forever. If you look at Woodstock, if you look at the movie Woodstock, there's one guy that says, I don't know what they're spraying us with up there. They talk about cloud seeding and various things. So it's not a new phenomenon. But okay, so up on the screen I see this is 2009. This is February 7th, I believe, because they have summer in our winter. And so this would have been the middle of the summer for them. So 2009, yep, it was early 2009 too. So that was almost 10 years ago, almost to the day. And so, the things they were experiencing then are being experienced now in California. And I think a lot of it has to do with the heat, and that could very well be part of the geoengineering program as well. But that part I'm not going to speculate on too much, but I do really believe that the EMFs are part of the problem. But part of it is that when fires get to a certain degree of heat, they take on an actual ecosystem of their own. And that's what they're talking about in this documentary. I think that's the most important part, because you're hearing about the winds, because people are saying, well, the Santa Ana winds, exacerbated the problem. Well, actually, the fire becomes a windstorm. And I think that's what people have a really hard time understanding. I've never been in a fire like that. I've been in a fire where I could feel the wind. And I've also created a rocket stove. For any of you that know about that technology, you can actually create a stove system, even with cinder blocks, whereby there's basically air that's coming in. It's feeding the fire in such a way that it turns into a rocket. You can hear it. It sounds like a rocket, and that's why they call it a rocket stove. And that's with cinder blocks, not even using any special materials whatsoever, but it's just the way that you put it together, and the way that the fire is made, so that it's being fed by the air, and then it creates this wind. So that's another aspect that I'll talk about. So I think I'm going to wrap it up. I hope you'll all come back tomorrow, and I hope you bring your friends, subscribe, and like, and talk about this. And again, ask questions. I will pass the questions along to Dr. Judy Wood, and even if she doesn't come on, if she's very busy, but if she can't make it on, I will try to get the answers from her, and I will try to answer you personally, either on in the discussion itself where you're making your comments, or on an upcoming show. I'll do a question and answer, but I'm going to just be focusing on this for as long as it takes to. So I'm going to suggest that tennis brings people that she might want to have ask questions. Maybe sometimes it's easier to have people ask questions of a stranger than a friend, and it's less intimidating, and they don't have to be sitting beside you. They can be at home at their computer, and they can just tune in, and we can have a discussion about this. So I really thank you guys for joining me, and I hope that you will pass this along for what it's worth. I know that I didn't get started for about 2 minutes or so, maybe a little bit more. So just have people skip over the very first part and get to the beginning, and at least take a look at some of the images that I've been presenting and some of the information, and do go home and, well, you are at home or wherever you are watching this, but take the time to educate yourself about what fires look like, and in particular this Australian fire, and also what do weapons look like as well. So thanks very much again for being with me. And this is Joni, and I've really enjoyed having you. Love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.